Well, thank you, Michael, for this kind introduction, and thank you, Thomas and Gwendal, for having me and for this quite inspiring conference hitherto. Hopefully, it won't get worse by now. Okay. War and political upheaval used to be historical phases with exceptional huge potential to shape the future. This, of course, is a commonplace, but it particularly fits with World War I. In contrast to common ex-post narratives, which tend to stress the indisputable risks of the situation, talking about opening Pandora's box, like the German historian Jörn Leonhard, or with George Kennan about the seminal catastrophe of the century. The actors of the time also had a view for the chances of the situation. Edward Mandell House, chief advisor of the US president, summarized later, "We were confronted with a situation full of possibilities for harm, full of potentially for good." In the next 20 minutes, and I promise 20 minutes and not more, I'd like to give you a brief insight of one key challenge for the Allied peace planning and the solutions therefore discussed. Okay, what was the challenge? Of course, there were several challenges, but beyond the individual strategic goal of each Allied states, there was the increasing question of how to forge a new states order. You can even say a new world order. The old order, established in 1815 in Vienna as an old-fashioned dynastic settlement, had been challenged by modern nationalist movements long before the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, which finally destroyed this Vienna system. Over decades, the Western powers had experienced how particularly the claim for self-determination as a vehicle of several ethno-nationalist dynamics had served that development. Moreover, self-determination at least did not prevent the outbreak of the Great War. Not a few people would argue that it actually fostered it. Despite this experience, the expectation addressed to the peacemakers was to pave the way for an even more consequent and more comprehensive application of this principle. Self-determination became, one can say, a conditio sine qua non for any settlement being regarded as reasonable. This demand was a result of the using of this term as a tool of strategic warfare intended to destabilize the enemy, especially the old empires like Austria-Hungary or the Ottoman Empire as well. Once the feelings of national passion and longing for independence were stirred up, the genie was out of the bottle, and it could not be put back after the war just because self-determined aspirations wouldn't match with the Allied war aims. Moreover, several leading statesmen of the West were honestly convinced of self-determination as a key to a more just or a more democratic world. Above all, as you certainly all know, the President of the United States. Thomas Woodrow Wilson argued that, I quote, no peace can last which does not recognize and allege the principle that governments derive all their just power from the consent of the governed, and that no right anywhere exists to hand out people from sovereignty to sovereignty as if they were property. Citation end. As this maxim probably illustrates, the president's version of self-determination aimed at what one could call the demos, to say it in Old Greek. His recipients in contemporary war-shaped Europe, though, translated it as ethnos, and typized it as an appreciation of their tendency aggressive ethnic policy. In the sequel, the Western powers found themselves confronted with, and that's again a citation, wildest expectations by scattered groups of dissatisfied people, citation end, all around the globe. One propagandist catchword of the time was irredenta, the claim of a nation state to annex territory which it regarded as unredeemed, and irredenta. The most powerful tool for irredentists' claim was a population which could be regarded as kindred to the nation's own in one way or another. It could be language, it could be religious confession, common history, and so on. The appreciation of self-determination as a benchmark for judging the settlement entailed significant problems for the peace planning. First, due to the hybrid and often ambiguous design of ethnicity, it was far from clear which ethnic group was admitted, being a nation and receiving autonomy. Second, there was a contradiction between the object of realizing self-determination and another main war goal, the credo of fighting a war to end all wars, made it mandatory to aim at a settlement as stable and durable as possible. But how could a peace be stable, which would be built up upon such an unstable or even eruptive principle like self-determination? So much about the challenge. Now some short remark about those who were challenged. At that time, a new expert culture was invented, which was about not to replace, but to complement traditional diplomacy. It was already in 1915 when Edward House, anticipating a future peace conference, recommended to the British Secretary of State, Edward Grey then, to collect as much data as possible, I cite, thoroughly prepared and digested in order that nothing should be left to chance, citation end. Indeed, Westminster later founded some specific advising body for this purpose. Most prominently the Political Intelligence Department, PYD, of the Foreign Office. This term is a bit misleading. Intelligence doesn't mean Secret Service in this context. Under the chairmanship of William Tyrrell, a primary rock of the office, then about 30 years part of the Foreign Office. Under his chairmanship, an illustrious circle of scientists was assembled. Lawyers, geographers, linguists, and especially historians, like James Hadley Morley, Robert Seton Watson, or Arnold Toynbee. Some other diplomats complemented the group. The most well-known of whom probably was Harold Nicholson. You may have heard about him. After entering into the war in 1917, the United States got a similar board, which was called the Inquiry. Last but not least, also the Third Republic of France had comparable expert bodies, but here the political advising was divided from the more scientific research. The latter was performed by the Comité d'études, a faculty of Sorbonne University, while a special commission under the conservative MP André Tardieu was tasked to determine the actual war ends. So that about the representatives, and now what concepts did they create? Following my interpretation of the sources, there were three main overall concepts for future order, one of which had two optional figurations of population policy. This may sound a bit strange, but I will explain it. This was again Wilson, and here you can see the guys of the Inquiry already at the Paris Peace Conference, and now the concepts. There was first the permanent solution of national states with one solution for risk reduction through minority protection, and another through population transfers. And then there were two alternatives, one of which would be the federal alternative, and the other something which I call the temporal alternative. Due to our close time schedule, I cannot talk about the second and the third one today, even though they were quite interesting. Maybe we have time in the debate later to to mention some of their aspects. But now I'll concentrate on the regulatory model permanent national state, mainly because this solution was the one actually applied later on. This development that this national solution would be applied not only resulted from the spirit of the time, it was also a consequence of the active political advocating in Western capitals by agents such as Tomasz Masaryk, Ignacy Paderewski, or Eleftherios Venizelos. All politicians who had a very good standing in Western Europe and in the United States. Not least as a result of their lobbying, the majority, for example, the British peace planners supported their vice director James Hadley Morley, I mentioned him, who assumed, I cite, every reason to hope that states based on the conscious existence of a common nationality will be more durable than the older form of state. Here is it. The government under Prime Minister David Lloyd George followed such like expertise as it in the beginning of 1917 declared, I cite again, the principle of nationality to guide the formation of a territorial settlement. But even those champions of national states did not deny the pending fragility of their favorite order. No thinkable border drawing could have prevented the remaining of ethnic minorities, national minorities as they were received in several old and new states alike. The most convenient solution to smooth the conflicts resulting therefrom was a legal system of minority protection, a regional predecessor of which was invented at the Berlin Congress in 1878. And which would be reinvented after 1945 by the CSCE and later by the Council of Europe. After World War I, international minority protection was added to several peace contracts with the allocation of expenditure to the League of Nations, which itself was a result from the contracts, of course. There is a lot of evidence that the central object of this protection system was the stabilization of the new order against irredentism. Alan Leeper, a colleague of James Hadley Morley within the PID, uttered already in October 1918, where the inhabitants of a country, irrespective of race, language, or religion, are guaranteed equal rights by a written constitution or are in traditional and effective enjoyment of them, the claim of secession can clearly be ruled out. Minorities protection thus had a specific function for the peace order. In contrast to the pursuit enduring global peace, the peace planners conceptualized it as a regional and preferably temporarily restricted tool. James Hadley Morley, for example, was talking about a special exceptional provision, preferably a temporary one, like I said, made to suit a particular exceptional case. Approximately at the same time, he expressed his hope that these states, the states upon which minority protection should be imposed, will govern themselves in such a way that they may eventually be free from these restrictions on their sovereignty. Hence, the final intention of this minority policy was to make itself superfluous. Probably the most popular witness of the strategy was Houston Chamberlain, who declared to the Council of the League of Nations in 1926, citation, the object, there it is. The object of the minority treaties was to secure for the minorities that measure of protection and justice which would gradually prepare them to be merged into the national community. Citation end. Nonetheless, from the very beginning of the planning process, there had been great skepticism with regard to the feasibility of an effective safeguarding relating to minorities. The experience with previous attempts in the matter, for example in the Balkans, provided ample evidence of pending difficulties. As a result, this concept of the concept of ethnic unmixing, this is a contemporary term, unmixing, in order to prevent any minority question became more and more popular, even in liberal cultures and in liberal political camps. In the British House of Commons, for instance, the centre-left MPs Charles Roden and Noel Edward Buxton, two brothers by the way, made the case for population transfers as well as their conservative colleague Halford Mackinder. In the neutral Switzerland, the anthropologist Georges Montandon argued for, how he called it, transplantation massive, as the, I cite, condition primordiale nécessaire à l'obtention d'une paix durable. The primary condition, the primary necessary condition for an enduring peace. So the title of his book referring to the issue. Within the inner circle of peace planning, this idea was rather subtly indicated than openly demanded. After all, it was a break with the humanitarian self-perception of the West. We've heard a lot about the concept of the West. And PYD founder Charles Herding, for instance, declared in April '99 concerning the emerging Czechoslovakia, all these difficulties are likely to disappear as soon as the Germans of Bohemia realize that they will have to live in amity with their Czech neighbors or go elsewhere. The PID, but the PID also made a more concrete approach in this direction regarding Asia Minor, a region where in the very end a compulsory population exchange was actually carried out as part of the Lausanne settlement in 1923. After the defeat of the Ottoman Empire, the British experts were seeking a solution of how to assist their Greek ally with realizing their so-called great idea, the possession of both Aegean coasts and thus of Western Asia Minor part around Smyrna, Izmir, was a core target of this megali idea, how the Greek called it. A PID memo from December 1918 stated for the case of allowing Athens this annexation, I cite, the territory assigned to Greece should obviously contain a predominantly Greek population. The fact that Turkish and Greek elements are at present almost everywhere intermingled would make an interchange of populations by migration necessary in Western Anatolia as in other parts of Southeastern Europe and the Middle East. To sum up, as this brief insight hopefully illustrated, during the Great War, a group of Western politicians and scientists made plans of how to integrate the nationalist breakthrough of the time with some kind of international security. They yielded a wide range of possible future orders for the purpose of coping with ethnicity and irredentism, including a federal world state and a time limitation of the whole order with periodical revision of states' borders. That's what I called the temporal solution, or the temporal alternative. Even within the frame of permanent national states, different temporary measures to calm down ethnic clashes were discussed and subsequently applied. This included the protection of minorities as well as their emigration and as ultima ratio, even their expulsion. Those very diverse regulatory models within the one Elliott peace planning, notwithstanding, served one and the same policy. That's at least my hypothesis. A policy of reducing the likeliness of a new war. In this regard, the selection of a regulatory model was not so much an ideological problem, but rather one of practical decision. Okay, thank you for holding on this long today and for your attention. Cheers.